Ever since Nikon announced their 600mm prime lens with a built-in 1.4 extender, I developed a severe case of lens envy. The prospect of not having to change teleconverters all the time in the field was very intriguing to me, to say the least. Now you can simply flick a switch. It's actually been a while since I've been this excited about camera equipment. My first impression of the lens was that it's quite short and relatively lightweight, although a bit heavier than my 600mm RF prime lens from Canon. However, once we add the 1.4 extender to the Canon lens, it weighs about the same as the Nikon lens, and both of these lenses have a similar weight to Sony's lens with the 1.4 extender attached as well. Nikon's lens is much shorter than the Canon lens, part of which is due to the shorter lens hood, but the lens itself is also shorter, which makes it much easier to travel with. Compared to Nikon's previous 600mm f-mount lens, the new 600mm TC lens is slightly longer, but when you actually add the adapter to use the old lens with the Z9, the new combo is now significantly shorter. Weight-wise, the naked 600mm TC lens is about 600 grams or 1.3 pounds lighter than its predecessor. What makes the Nikon combo a little bit heavier in the field than the Sony and Canon combos is not actually the lens itself, but the camera, the Z9. It weighs a lot more than a Canon R3 for instance, and significantly more than a Sony A1 or Canon R5 without the battery grips. However, I had no problems holding the lens in the field for extended periods of time. What actually helped me with hand holding the lens was the amazing image stabilization in combination with the IBIS of the Z9. And that totally makes up for the little bit of extra weight. I've simply not used a more stable combos over all the years that I've used camera equipment. I thought my R3 with a 600mm RF prime lens was stable, but the Z9 with the 600mm TC lens is a whole nother league. The viewfinder basically does not move, and you can even do handheld video quite easily, so I was very impressed with that. One early morning I ventured out to photograph Pacific golden plovers. These cool birds fly all the way from Alaska to Australia to winter here and then fly back to North America to breed there. Pretty crazy. And for some reason they actually choose to hang out in this weird housing estate down here on an island. When I got there just before sunrise, I spotted a few birds standing on the rocks with a beautiful yellow background, which was actually a kayak on the other side of the shore. Even though the light was still low, I didn't want to waste this amazing opportunity, so I turned on the camera, dialed in ISO 6400, 100th of a second, 840mm wide open, and I snapped away. I took 300 or 400 images because I was expecting that there would be a lot of blur images. But to my surprise, almost all the images were nice and sharp, which is a true testament to the image stabilization of that lens that I can handhold 840mm at 100th of a second. To get to my final image, I used DxO Pure to remove the noise from the file, which worked very well. Then I used my Vibrant More Contrast Pro set in Adobe Camera Raw to get the colors right and give me a good starting point. And then I used my Masterclass workflow to get the absolute most out of the image. And then I got this final image that I'm very happy with. And if you want to learn all about image editing and my pro sets, make sure to check these out down there in the description. Whenever I use the Z9 and Z-mount lenses, I use a standard image stabilization mode. It simply seems more stable to me than the sport mode. The sport mode is quite hectic and gives me sometimes some jumps or shake. Unless I'm moving the camera a lot, then it seems to work quite well, but I definitely get the best results with the standard mode. What is kind of unique about the 600mm TC lens is that it has hardly any buttons on the lens. Most of the settings like image stabilization are actually all set in the camera. The minimum focusing distance on the lens is 4.3 meters or 14.1 feet, which is a little bit longer than the Canon lens and it's much shorter than the Sony lens. In the field, I didn't really have any issues with it, except for the one time when this beautiful Eastern Yellow Robin landed right in front of me and I had to back up a bit to actually get this image. But check out the crazy details and sharpness in this photo though. Like all Z-mount lenses, the 600mm TC lens has a lens function button on the lens that allows you to program all sorts of different things to it, like autofocus for instance. And on top of that, it has also 2 control or function rings where you can also program a bunch of settings to. On top of that, it also has a memory set button that allows you to program in a certain distance that the camera will then always focus back to when you press a button or turn one of the rings. Personally, I disabled all functions of all the buttons and rings on the lenses because I kind of find it better to do all this in the camera, and it stops me from accidentally changing settings when I'm hand holding a lens, because that can easily happen if you assign it to one of these rings and then just accidentally kind of brush it. Speaking about hand holding, this is where I kind of discovered the only design flaw of the 600mm TC lens. The positioning of the manual focus ring is so far back on the lens that it's very difficult to reach it when you're on a tripod, because your fingers are normally further in the front on the lens. And when you're hand holding the lens, it's also very difficult because whenever I hand hold the lens, the palm of my hand is right where the manual focusing ring is. So I involuntarily move it around when I'm hand holding the lens. And the other problem is that now, because my hand's kind of already sitting on the manual focus ring, but my fingers aren't, I can't really turn the ring without doing really weird finger gymnastics. So this is not a huge issue in the end, but it's definitely annoying when you try to manually intervene with the autofocusing because the camera is stuck on the background or can't find the right subject. The teleconverter switch on the lens is in a fantastic spot, and you can effortlessly slide it in and out with your middle and ring fingers. So no complaints there at all. This is very well done. The autofocus in combination with the Z9 was also fantastic. It took me a little while to set up the Z9 the right way and got the most out of it, but once I had done that, I got fantastic results and nice and fast autofocus with good tracking. I will actually make a separate video about the Z9 and how I went with it in the field with the latest firmware and some of my settings, but for this video I think it's enough if I tell you that I had a wide area custom on the shutter button with a pretty large wide area, and then I had the 3D tracking on the AF on button, and I kind of alternated between the two modes, finding one with the one mode and then had 3D tracking taking over to track the bird, and that worked very well. While photographing shorebirds at a local wetland, I noticed this really aggressive black-winged stilt that constantly chased all the other birds around. But in return, that allowed me to capture some fantastic action scenes, and I was actually quite impressed how well the Z9 and the 600mm lens tracked birds coming basically directly at me. This wasn't the first time in my tests with the Z9 where I noticed that it's very well equipped at handling things coming directly at you, and I got better results than with most other combos. With the teleconverter engaged, the autofocus still worked fantastically well and I got great results. Being able to simply flick a switch and go from a too wide scene to a nice and intimate scene like these two lorikeets is something that was just fantastic in the field and a lot of fun to work with. These lorikeets, however, don't play as nicely as the ones in the last image. Most of the time they actually love to ruffle each other's feathers. Good for me though, because I could capture some great action images like these two here, where one tried to actually choke the other one. And here I got another image where both of the lorikeets went full steam at each other, where the Z9 tracked very well and got me a nice and sharp image of the action. The main issue with this image was that there's a bit of a garden shed in the background and a couple of the lorikeets' head at the lower end, and that the image was a little bit too steep on an angle. So I turned the file slightly and removed everything at the bottom, giving me a great looking overall image. I really just love watching these colorful birds and their crazy moves. If you want to learn how to edit your own images and how to make them look amazing, I would love to help you to do that with my masterclass and my ProSets. With my ProSets, I allow you to transform your RAW files with just one click. And in my masterclass, I teach you step by step everything you need to know about image editing, like how to remove things, how to get the best colors, and how to make your own images look all around amazing. So if that's of interest to you, make sure to check this out down there in the description. Besides giving me great flexibility and awesome autofocus, the lens also delivered fantastic image quality. Check out this example of the masked lapwing. I saw it walking along the beach, so I lay flat on the sand and followed it along with the lens. And then it actually started to grab this tiny little crab and try to eat it. However, this crab really didn't want to be eaten. It hung on for dear life and actually kind of clawed onto the bird's beak, and the bird didn't like it, so it shook its head. The crab fell off to the ground and ran away and actually escaped the bird. So that was pretty cool. And if we actually zoom into these files to 100%, we can see the amazing detail and the amazing sharpness I get from this lens at 840mm. You see all the details in the bird and even the crab. So when it comes to overall image quality, sharpness and details in the files, the lens performed very well with and without the extender. A true testament to how hand-holdable this lens is another example of a Blackwing stilt. This time I discovered them on the beach, something that is very rare and I'd never seen before. Usually they hang out in sort of dirty, muddy ponds and you never get to see their full long legs as well. So in this case, I was very excited because they were standing on the beach with a beautiful distant sort of blue water and mountain background. The only challenge was that I had to get very low to get the blue background. So I waited out there and then put the camera very close to the water using the rear screen, trying to get as low as possible. And the fantastic image stabilization helped me a lot with being able to achieve this shot, because even though I was hand holding the lens kind of in front of my body, I was still able to get a nice and stable viewfinder and got all the shots that I wanted in this quite unique image. This is also a great example where having the built-in teleconverter was invaluable, because I would never be able to change extenders while hand-holding a big lens in the middle of a puddle. Even though I'm mainly Canon shooter, I'm seriously tempted by this lens. It's hands down the best 600mm prime lens I've used to date because of the built-in 1.4 extender. It works great in the field and offers us flexibility we just cannot find in other prime lenses, except for maybe Nikon's 2.8 400mm lens with the built-in 1.4 extender. I truly hope Nikon started a trend here and we will see more and more built-in teleconverters also from other brands going forward. It makes our lives as photographers so much easier because none of us actually enjoy swapping out teleconverters. This lens simply allowed me to capture images and different scenes that would have been much harder to capture with a traditional prime lens and conventional teleconverters. And this is something that I actually value quite a lot. The biggest downside of this lens, of course, is the price of around $16,000 US, which is definitely not for the faint-hearted, and a lot more than most of the traditional 600mm lenses and extenders. So that puts most hobbyists out of the market for it, unfortunately, but if you can fit it in your budget, I think you will have a lot of fun with that lens. In my opinion, the amazing image stabilization, the fast autofocus, and the unique built-in teleconverter make this lens very desirable for all wildlife and especially bird photographers. I'd love to hear from you guys. What do you think about this lens and built-in teleconverters in general? Is this something that you would love to see going forward, or do you think it would just amp up the prices more and more of these lenses? And what are your experiences with the 600mm TC lens if you had the chance to already play around with one? Do you own one? Are you planning to buy one? Let me know in the comments. I'm currently working on my Z9 review with the latest firmware, which I will hopefully be able to post soon. And in there, I will also share my settings with you that brought me the most success, especially when it comes to the autofocus. While I get back to that, why don't you guys check out some of my other videos? So do that, enjoy your day, and I will see you guys very soon. Bye. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe. See ya.